All right, so for those of you who would like to see a few more examples to solidify your understanding of how to get the equation of a line from a graph, here are some additional examples. So remember that when I am trying to find the equation of a line, it should take on the form y equals mx plus b. And m is the value of my slope, and b is the value of my y-intercept, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I don't want to use the variables x and y because those aren't the variables that are actually representing what's going on here, right? So it looks like my y-axis has distance in miles. So I'm going to say, instead of having a y here, I'm going to say d, right? D is for distance. And then when I look down here at time in hours, I'm going to replace my x variable with a variable that tells me a bit more about what I'm figuring out. Right? But I still have to figure out slope, and I have to figure out my y-intercept, right? I find usually the y-intercept is easier to figure out. I just need to see where is my graph crossing the y-axis, and it's crossing exactly at 0. So I'm going to leave that as 0 for now. So now the only part that I'm missing is really just this slope. So the slope of the line, I'm going to use my rise and my run to figure that out. I'm going to try to find some decent points here. So this, as it turns out, is a little trickier for this graph. I can see that there's a point right here that looks like it's exactly on the line, and the only one I'm seeing here is, nope, not even seeing one. So I'm going to use this one right here, and that will be my best guess for the equation of this line. So to get my slope, I'm going to look at my rise and my run. Try to draw this triangle as straight as I can. In my rise, I'm going from 0 all the way up to 26. So this is 26, so my rise is 26. And my run is all the way up to 2 here. So 2. So my slope, m, is my rise of 26. So I'm going 26 miles in a matter of 2 hours. Oh, that's a fast rate. So that tells me that my slope is 13 miles an hour. And so all I need to do is to go back and fill that value in for m. Fill that in as 13. So I have an equation, d equals 13 times t plus 0. Does the 0 really need to be there? Well, it's not wrong if you include it. But it really doesn't need to be there. So the equation in this case is simply d equals 13t. Done. So here's another graph. It looks like I have a decreasing slope. So going back to the basics, I know that the equation of a line is written in the form y equals mx plus b. So if I find my slope and my y-intercept, I'm good to go. So but let's replace those x and y variables by some variables that have meaning in this case. So it looks like on my y-axis, if I have gallons in the tank, right? So that's, I'm going to use, maybe I could use volume because that's a volume measurement, but I'm going to use gallons. So the number of gallons. And then for my x variable, I'm going to see, well, what is the variable on my x-axis? Well, it's miles driven. Right? So maybe I want to, instead of using another m here, maybe I want to use something like a distance, right? Because that's really what miles are. It's a distance. So the only other things left to figure out are my y-intercept and my slope value. So I look at the graph and look for my y-intercept, and ooh, there it is at 15. So I'm going to go to my equation and change that to 15. I'm almost there. The only thing left to do is to actually calculate my slope. So I'm actually going to look over here and find some values that are close together. So I know that my rise in this case is 1. I can see that 14 to 15 is 1. And my run, I'm going from 0 to 25, so my run is 25. Now that's a decimal. Or not a decimal, but a fraction, but that's okay. It's okay to write in the equation of a line a value as a fraction. If you're more comfortable with a decimal though, that will work. So we've got 1 over 25, so my slope is going to be my rise over my run. My rise is 1, my slope is 20, or my run is 25, so I've got 1 over 25. So I'm going to put that in, but before I do, I'm going to check to see, so 1 divided by 25, d, right? That's my slope. But I also notice that it's decreasing, right? So, and that makes sense. The more gas I use, you know, the more miles I drive, the more gas that gets used. So I'm going to actually make this a negative 1 divided by 25. If I wanted to, though, I could use my calculator and say 1 divided by 25. It'd get that into a decimal value, and that would work fine. So I hope that those examples were able to help you out. Here's an example of another graph that you could do, except that you're limited in this case by the information given. So if you're ever in the situation where you can't easily figure out the slope or the y-intercept, then what you can do is you can just kind of make your best guess, right? So right here I can see that the y-intercept is somewhere between 30 and 35, not exactly halfway, so 32 would be a good guess. I'm not seeing really great points here to calculate slope, but you know, I would make the best out of it, choose the best points possible given the information that I have, and then kind of go from there, right? But most of the questions that you'll have will give you some pretty clear values for that. All right, so now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to work on the assignment for today's homework and ask any questions if you need extra assistance.